Tell me, Nurse Veris, what exactly do you know about humans? The stars bore witness to an endless war. The Terran Federation and the Sci-Fi Empire had been locked in conflict for years, their battles stretching across entire solar systems. Now, in the aftermath of a brutal skirmish, a temporary ceasefire allowed both factions to recover their wounded. Far from the front lines, the Orion Prime Medical Hub operated as a neutral facility, treating soldiers regardless of their allegiance. The station was a marvel of interstellar engineering, its sprawling medical bays filled with beings from across the galaxy, each bearing the scars of war. Among the dedicated medical staff was Lina Veris, a Velmari nurse. Velmari were a graceful, slender species with luminous emerald skin and dark, flowing hair. Their advanced medical knowledge made them invaluable in galactic medicine, but humans new to the wider cosmic community still remained a mystery to them. That mystery deepened when Lina was assigned a new patient, Captain Adrian Kane. The doors to the emergency bay hissed open as medics rushed in, pushing a hovering stretcher. On it lay a human soldier, unconscious but alive. His breathing was steady, his muscular frame tense even in unconsciousness. His uniform was tattered, his face marred by soot and blood, but beneath the grime, his features were striking angular jawline, short dark hair, and a rugged resilience that spoke of years in battle. Lina skimmed over his medical report. Patient, Captain Adrian Kane. Species, human. Affiliation, Terran Federation. Injuries, cranial trauma, minor fractures, mild internal bleeding. Status, stable. She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic scene, and while she had treated a few before, each case had been an enigma. Their biology was both robust and unpredictable, making every treatment a challenge. The lead physician, Dr. Samuel Grant, glanced over at her. "You've got this one, Nurse Veris. He took a nasty hit to the head, but his vitals are holding steady. We'll keep him under observation." Lina nodded. "Understood. I'll monitor him closely." As the medical team dispersed, Lina remained by his bedside, adjusting the bioscanner. She studied his face, so different from the delicate, elongated features of her own people. Humans were solid, defined, carved from battle itself. For a brief moment, curiosity stirred within her. What was it like to live in a body so different from her own? Hours later, as part of standard procedure, Lina prepared a medical sponge bath to clean the unconscious captain's wounds. She worked with precision, moving methodically to ensure no injuries were overlooked. However, as she reached his lower body, something unexpected happened. She paused. The bioscanner flickered strangely. Then, before her very eyes, something began to swell. Lina's hands froze. Her breath hitched. By the celestial stars, what is happening? Alarm flared in her chest. This wasn't normal. None of the human medical records she had studied had ever mentioned spontaneous swelling as a critical symptom. Her mind raced. Could it be an adverse reaction to medication? A circulatory failure? Internal hemorrhaging? "Doctor, emergency!" She called out, panic creeping into her usually calm voice. Within seconds, Dr. Grant rushed in, followed by several nurses. Lina stepped back, pointing at the concerning phenomenon. Dr. Grant took one look at Captain Kane's condition and laughed, a deep, hearty laugh. The other nurses exchanged amused glances, some covering their mouths to stifle their own chuckles. Lina, utterly perplexed, looked between them. What is this? Is he in danger?" she demanded. "Oh, Nurse Veris," one of the older staff members said, shaking their head with mirth. "That's not a medical emergency. That's just a natural reaction." Lina blinked. "A reaction to what?" Dr. Grant smirked. "Let's just say that your touch may have been a little too effective." It took her a moment to understand. Then, as realization dawned, her emerald skin flushed a deep shade of Violet Velmari's version of a blush. She had never been more mortified in her life. As the laughter died down, Dr. Grant patted her shoulder. "Welcome to human anatomy, Nurse Veris. You might want to do some additional research before your next patient." Determined to maintain her dignity, Lina squared her shoulders, nodded briskly, and returned to her work, pointedly ignoring the knowing glances from her colleagues. Still, as she resumed her careful cleansing, she couldn't stop herself from sneaking another glance at Captain Kane. Humans, it seemed, were far more fascinating than she had ever imagined. Despite her initial embarrassment, Lina Veris couldn't shake her growing curiosity about Captain Adrian Kane. She had treated countless soldiers, but there was something about humans, something about him, that kept pulling her attention back. Over the next few days, Adrian remained unconscious, his body slowly healing under the advanced care of Orion Prime Medical Hub. Lina found herself checking on him more frequently than necessary, reassuring herself that it was merely professional diligence. But if that were true, why did she linger by his bedside, studying the slow rise and fall of his chest? Why did she catch herself wondering what his life had been like before the war? One evening, as she adjusted the neural monitor attached to his temple, his fingers switched. Lina leaned in closer. Then, his eyes opened. For a moment, he seemed dazed, his gaze unfocused. Then, piercing storm gray eyes locked onto hers. "Where?" His voice was rough, dry. "Where am I?" Lina's breath caught for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "You're in the Orion Prime Medical Hub. You sustained injuries during battle, but your condition is stable." Adrian blinked slowly, his lips quirking up into a weak but undeniably mischievous smile. "Damn, thought I was dead for sure." She tilted her head, puzzled by the casual way he spoke about near-death experiences. "You are very much alive, Captain Kane." A beat of silence stretched between them before Adrian's smirk widened. His voice, though still hoarse, took on a playful lilt. "Well, if this is heaven, then I must say, the angels are far more beautiful than I imagined." Lina stiffened, a sudden warmth creeping up her neck. Was he flirting? Her species rarely engaged in such direct exchanges of attraction, and she wasn't sure how to respond. But before she could formulate a reply, Dr. Samuel Grant entered the room. "Ah, Captain Kane, welcome back to the land of the living." The older doctor's jovial voice filled the space. He glanced at Lina with an amused smirk. "I see Nurse Veris has been tending to you quite well." Adrian's eyes flickered with something unreadable interest. Amusement? Before he responded, "I'd say I'm in very capable hands." Lina pursed her lips, choosing to ignore the way her heart seemed to pick up pace. In the following days, Captain Kane's recovery progressed at an astonishing rate, a testament to human resilience, as Dr. Grant had put it. Lina continued her duties, monitoring his progress, ensuring that his therapy sessions were efficient. But something had changed between them. She was hyper-aware of the way his gaze followed her as she moved around the room, the way his voice carried a teasing edge whenever he spoke to her. And worst of all, she wasn't entirely opposed to it. During one of their post-treatment sessions, Adrian leaned back against the medbed, his strength returning. "So tell me, Nurse Veris," he drawled, "do Vilmari always take their jobs this seriously? Or am I just getting special treatment?" Lina arched a brow, crossing her arms. "I treat all my patients with the same level of professionalism, Captain." He grinned, his rugged features lighting up with something undeniably charming. "Good to know. But let's be honest, you've been checking on me a lot, haven't you?" Her posture stiffened. "I am ensuring your full recovery." Adrian leaned forward slightly, the movement deliberate, calculated. "Or maybe, you're just a little curious about me." Lina should have denied it immediately. She should have dismissed the accusation as baseless. But instead, she hesitated. And that hesitation was all Adrian needed. He tilted his head, voice lowering ever so slightly. "Tell me, Nurse Veris, what exactly do you know about humans?" Later that evening, long after she had left Adrian's room, Lina found herself in the medical archives, searching through files she never thought she'd be interested in. Human anatomy, human behavioral psychology, human social customs. Her fingers hovered over each selection before tapping into them, her mind buzzing with questions she had never asked before. What made humans so different from Volmari? Why did their words carry such weight, their gazes seem so intense? And why, out of all the beings she had ever encountered, was Captain Adrian Kane, the one who occupied her thoughts long after she had left his side? Lina closed her research tablet, exhaling deeply. She had a feeling she was about to cross a line she couldn't come back from. Lina Veris had always prided herself on her professionalism. She had treated hundreds of soldiers, patched up wounds, monitored vitals, and provided care without ever forming personal attachments. But Captain Adrian Kane was different. Ever since his awakening, their interactions had taken on an undeniable intensity. She told herself it was merely curiosity, that her fascination with human physiology was purely academic. But she knew that was a lie. She felt it every time Adrian's storm-gray eyes lingered on her a little too long. Every time his voice dipped into a lower, teasing tone when he spoke to her. And worst of all, she felt it in herself, the way her pulse quickened whenever she entered his room, the way her fingers hesitated just slightly before adjusting his vitals. She was crossing a dangerous line, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop. One evening, after a particularly strenuous physical therapy session, Lina stayed behind to check Adrian's progress. His recovery was astounding. Human resilience continued to baffle her. Though his injuries had been severe, his muscle strength was already returning. "All right, Captain," she said, keeping her tone neutral as she helped him lower onto the medbed. "Your progress is within optimal parameters. You should be." Her words caught in her throat as she suddenly found herself far too close to him. She had been supporting his weight, and now, as he settled onto the medbed, her hands remained on his bare shoulders. The heat of his skin seeped into her palms, the solid strength of him impossible to ignore. Her pulse pounded. She should step away. But Adrian, ever perceptive, noticed the hesitation. His gaze flickered between her eyes and her parted lips, and something in the air shifted. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. For the first time since she had met him, Lina didn't feel in control of the situation. Adrian's voice was lower, rougher when he finally broke the silence. "You can let go now, Nurse Veris." Lina's fingers twitched, but she didn't move. She wasn't sure why she couldn't. Adrian's gaze darkened slightly. "Unless you don't want to." That was when she finally snapped back to reality. Lina pulled her hands away as if burned, stepping back so quickly she nearly bumped into the medical console. She struggled to find her words. "You should rest, Captain." A slow, knowing smirk spread across his lips. "Of course, nurse, whatever you say. But the damage was already done." Lina practically fled from the room, but the heat in her chest refused to fade. She had made a mistake, and the worst part? She wasn't entirely sure she regretted it. That night, Lina lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling of her dimly lit room. This wasn't normal. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about a patient. She wasn't supposed to think about the way his voice sounded when he spoke low, or the way his skin had felt beneath her hands. But she couldn't stop. A frustrated sigh escaped her lips as she sat up, grabbing her medical tablet and pulling up more files on human biology. Perhaps if she studied more, she could rationalize this. Her fingers hesitated over the search bar before she typed. The screen filled with results. Books, studies, and cultural analyses. Some were strictly scientific, detailing pheromonal responses and neurological triggers. Others were less so. Lina skimmed over passages describing intimacy, attraction, and the psychology of desire. She felt her throat go dry as she read descriptions of how humans formed bonds, how they initiated physical closeness, how they expressed interest through small touches, prolonged eye contact, lingering words. Her stomach twisted. Because if this data was accurate, if these were the natural indicators of human attraction, then Captain Adrian Kane had been flirting with her from the very beginning. And worse, she had been responding. The next morning, Lina resolved to keep her distance. She would maintain strict professionalism, no more hesitation, no more lingering thoughts. But that plan crumbled instantly when she arrived at Adrian's room. He wasn't there. Her heart lurched. The bed was empty, the sheets slightly rumpled, the medical scanner blinking with no active patient detected. Panic surged through her. Had he left the station? Had someone transferred him? Had. Then she heard the sound of running water from the adjoining bathroom. Lina froze. Oh no, she should turn around. She should leave immediately. But before she could, the bathroom door slid open. And there stood Adrian Kane, towel slung loosely around his waist, his skin still damp from the shower. Lina's mind blanked completely. Adrian raised a brow at her stunned expression. Then, because of course he did, he smirked. Well, he mused, crossing his arms over his very bare, very muscular chest. Couldn't wait to see me, nurse? Lina's entire body locked up. Heat flared up her neck as she spun on her heel so fast she nearly tripped. I didn't. Her words tangled as she stumbled toward the door. I thought you were missing. Adrian chuckled, clearly enjoying every second of this. I appreciate the concern. Lina didn't trust herself to look at him again. I'll come back later. Or, he drawled, you could stay. I'd be happy to answer any of those questions you've been researching. Lina stopped in her tracks. Her entire body stiffened. He knew. Her fingers clenched at her sides before she forced herself to move. Rest, Captain. Her voice was tight, controlled. I'll see you at your next session. And then she fled. By the time Lina reached the main corridor, her pulse was still erratic. This had gone too far. She had tried to control it. Tried to push it aside. But Captain Adrian Kane wasn't making that easy. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she wanted him to. For the next few days, Lina Veris kept her distance. She limited her visits to strictly medical purposes, ensuring that all interactions remained neutral, efficient, and professional. She focused on data, on vitals, on clinical assessments, anything to distract herself from the tension that had been growing between her and Captain Adrian Kane. And yet, it was impossible to ignore how his storm-gray eyes lingered on her every time she entered the room. It was impossible to ignore how he always seemed to smirk knowingly, as if waiting for her to acknowledge the unspoken truth between them. And worst of all, it was impossible to ignore how much she wanted to break her own rules. But she was a medical officer, bound by duty. She would not succumb to human games. Or so she thought. Everything unraveled the evening Dr. Victor Hayes made his move. Dr. Hayes had always been a rigid enforcer of protocol, and he had long suspected that something was off about Lina's interactions with Adrian. While he had no concrete evidence yet, he had watched her waiting for a mistake. That night, as Lina completed her rounds, Dr. Hayes cornered her outside the medical bay. "Nurse Veris," he said coolly, arms crossed. "A word." Lina turned to face him, keeping her posture calm. "Yes, doctor?" His gaze was sharp, dissecting. "You've been spending a significant amount of time with Captain Kane, more than necessary for standard medical care." Her stomach tightened, but she didn't let it show. "I ensure all my patients receive proper attention." Hayes gave a dry chuckle. "Come now, nurse, we both know this is different." Lina stiffened. "If you have an accusation, make it. Otherwise, I suggest you stop wasting my time." His smirk widened, dark amusement flickering in his gaze. "Oh, I don't need to make accusations." "Not yet, but the council board will be conducting routine evaluations soon. If there's anything inappropriate going on, I imagine it will come to light." A chill crept down her spine. "I'd be careful, Nurse Veris," Has added, voice dropping into something almost mocking. "Wouldn't want a Velmari like yourself jeopardizing your career over a human, now would we?" Lina's blood boiled at his condescending tone, but she kept her expression neutral. "I have nothing to hide." "Good," he mused. "Let's hope it stays that way." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing there, pulse hammering, anger simmering beneath her skin. Lina barely registered where she was going until she was outside Adrian's room. She shouldn't be here, not now, not like this. But she needed to see him. Taking a breath, she stepped inside. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, shirtless, his muscular frame tense as if he had been waiting for her. His sharp eyes flicked over her, immediately sensing her distress. "What happened?" His voice was softer than usual. No teasing, no games, just quiet concern. Lina hesitated, conflicted. "Nothing," she lied. "Just routine checks." Adrian's gaze narrowed, seeing through her. "Bullshit." She swallowed hard. "It doesn't concern you, Captain." A pause. Then Adrian stood, stepping closer. Her breath caught. "You're upset," he said, voice low, steady. "Tell me why." Lina's fingers curled into fists. She couldn't. But the weight of everything pressed down on her. Dr. Hayes' threats, the suffocating rules, the war, the frustration, the fear of losing something she didn't even fully understand yet. And then, Adrian did something that shattered her resolve entirely. He reached for her. A simple touch, just his fingers brushing over her wrist, but it was enough. Because the moment their skin connected, every bit of restraint Lina had been clinging to collapsed. She grabbed him by the collar, yanking him forward before she even realized what she was doing. And then she kissed him. The moment their lips met, the tension that had been building exploded. Adrian reacted instantly, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her against him as if he had been waiting for this, just as desperately as she had. His body was warm, solid, real against hers, and for the first time in days, she let herself feel. There was no hesitation in the way he kissed her back. No uncertainty. Just need, hunger, a raw, unspoken truth that neither of them could ignore anymore. Lina should have pulled away. But she didn't. Instead, she let herself drown in him, his taste, his heat, the way he moved against her, as if they had been on the brink of this from the very beginning. When they finally broke apart, their breathing was ragged, their foreheads resting together. Adrian smirked, but this time, it wasn't just teasing. It was something deeper. "Well," he murmured, voice husky. "About damn time." Lina exhaled shakily, her fingers still tangled in his uniform. She had crossed the line. And there was no turning back now. The moment Lina Veris stepped out of Captain Adrian Kane's room, reality crashed down on her. She had crossed the line. For days, weeks, she had fought against this, convincing herself that she could keep things professional, that she could ignore the way Adrian's gaze made her pulse quicken, the way his voice sent warmth curling through her veins. But now there was no denying it anymore. She had kissed him. And not just a fleeting mistake, it had meant something. Her fingers still tingled from where they had clutched his uniform. Her lips still burned from the way he had kissed her back, hungry, certain, as if he had been waiting for this moment as long as she had. But what happened now? She had risked everything for this. And soon, she would find out just how high the cost would be. The next morning, Lina barely made it through her rounds before she was summoned to the Administrative Council's chamber. The moment she stepped inside, she knew. Dr. Victor Hayes stood near the panel, his expression smug. He'd been waiting for this. Watching her, waiting for her to fail. The council members, senior figures who oversaw the hospital's neutrality, regarded her with stern expressions. Nurse Veris, one of them, began, voice steady but firm. "We have received reports of unprofessional conduct regarding your interactions with the patient Captain Adrian Kane." Lina forced herself to remain calm. "I assure you, my work has remained entirely focused on his recovery." Dr. Hayes scoffed. "So you deny that you've developed personal entanglements with the captain?" Lina's heart pounded. She could lie. She could deny everything. But then, what? They would watch her more closely, transfer Adrian away, separate them in a way she might never be able to fix. So instead, she took a breath and told the truth. "I care about him," she said, voice steady. "But it has not affected my duties or his recovery." The room fell silent. Dr. Hayes smirked as if he had already won. "Then you admit to misconduct?" One of the council members, the chief administrator, a woman known for her impartiality, leaned forward, studying Lina carefully. "I've reviewed Captain Kane's recovery logs," she said. "His condition has improved at an accelerated rate since being under your care. By all accounts, your treatment has been exemplary." Lina's breath caught. The administrator's gaze hardened. "However, this hospital operates under strict neutrality. Personal relationships between medical staff and patients can compromise that. Under normal circumstances, such behavior would result in immediate reassignment." Lina's heart sank. But then, the administrator turned to Dr. Hayes. "Tell me, Doctor, have you found any evidence that Nurse Veris has neglected her duties?" Dr. Hayes hesitated. Too long. "No," he admitted begrudgingly. The administrator turned back to Lina. "Then I see no reason for severe disciplinary action." Dr. Hayes stiffened. "But I will, however," the administrator continued, "be recommending a voluntary transfer should Nurse Veris wish to remove herself from the conflict of interest." Lina's breath hitched. This was it. Her choice. She could leave. Escape the scrutiny. Be safe. But leaving meant leaving Adrian behind. And that wasn't an option. So she did what no one expected. She stood her ground. "I would like to remain at Orion Prime," she said, "as long as I am permitted to continue treating Captain Kane." The administrator studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she nodded. "That very well. But let me be clear, professional boundaries must be maintained while he remains your patient." Lina exhaled. "Understood." The hearing ended. Dr. Hayes stormed out, furious but defeated. And Lina? She had won. That night, Lina found Adrian sitting in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. He turned as she approached, his smirk already forming. Well, thought they might have thrown you into a cryopod for that little stunt." She sighed, but there was relief in her smile. "Not quite." Adrian's smirk softened, turning into something real. "So, what now?" Lina took a breath. "I stay with conditions. As long as you're my patient, things remain professional." Adrian arched a brow. "And after?" She hesitated, then took a step closer. "After?" Her voice was quiet, certain. "We figure it out. Together." A slow smile spread across Adrian's face. "I like the sound of that." Lina felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something warm. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she was willing to fight for it. And no matter what happened, she knew one thing for certain. Captain Adrian Kane was worth the risk. And she was done pretending otherwise.